And, when I'm talking to people about what we need in society to change, we need, we talk about it on the show all the time, in the ISA, International Socialist Alternative, we talk about it, we need a socialist revolution. And people say, well, how can we get there? That's daunting. But it is possible to see these revolutionary moments come out of something so terrible like war. And, one example that I've heard, or not example, but quote, it seems like we're using a lot of quotes in this episode, so I'm going to continue, is war is the midwife of revolution. So Connor, can you talk about some examples throughout history where this actually played out?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a quote that really ties to so many revolutionary movements throughout history. So, I mean, you could go right back to even the Paris Commune, the first time workers really, tried to take power in history. And, this was a situation of war as well between France and Prussia, which was a country at the time. But it was in this context of the war that workers in Paris took power, spurred on by the crisis generated by that war. I mean, most importantly, obviously, I think, is the Russian Revolution and the revolutions that swept Europe following the First World War, like we've been talking about. The Zimmerwald left were absolutely right that the working class were going to turn against their respective classes and that and their war. And that the war would be, as you say, the midwife of revolution. And that it was the revolutionary working class who were actually the only force capable of seriously putting an end to that war as well. And, you began to see the workers in Russia were seeing that this was the case. They ended up, of course, overthrowing the Tsar, demanding an end to the war. The provisional government that was put in place after the Tsar abdicated wasn't able to provide this because it was, it's a continuation of capitalism and imperialism. And it was actually only a socialist revolution, only the workers coming to power that was able to end that war. And when the Bolsheviks came to power on the back of that revolution, they were able to actually follow through on that promise and did end Russia's involvement in the war. But it was the same all over Europe. In Germany, the war finally ended in the Western Front when the workers there also overthrew their monarch, the Kaiser, and very nearly had themselves a socialist revolution as well. In Italy, you had what was called the Two Red Years, this kind of revolutionary uprising that broke out in Hungary, in Ireland, all over Europe following the Second World War. There were these huge uprisings of working class people who'd been fighting in this war and kind of been at the sharp end of all of the worst aspects of capitalism, all the most vicious aspects of it, and weren't prepared to put up with this system anymore. And I think you can even make a certain comparison actually to this process that we talk about in more recent times as well. This isn't necessarily a war, but when the pandemic hit, and there was a similar drive of kind of propaganda, this move towards national unity, a kind of whipping up of this idea that we're all in this together, in a very similar way to a war, we made the point that unity that's being kind of put forward by the ruling class is, it's an illusion. That the real class differences at play in this situation would break through in an explosive way and you'd see big struggles. And it was actually, only a few months later that this idea that we all have the same interest was pretty much shattered following the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, which swept the world and, of course, were the biggest social movement in US history. And then, following that, it's just been a series of huge struggles here in the UK, directly actually in response to the government's measures, in total contrast to the idea of national unity over this, people fighting for workplace safety, for decent pay during the pandemic. But also, of course, like mass movements to overthrow corrupt and oppressive governments in Latin America, in Myanmar, and elsewhere. And I think, that is actually an example of a similar process that we see where, these kinds of ideas of national unity and these kinds of phenomena, whether it's war or, as we've seen, like even a pandemic, actually, those ideas do break down, and very explosive struggles can come through that have kind of been building up behind the scenes during those kind of periods. I think that's actually a big part of it, that these struggles do take on an explosive character when they've been bottled up like that. And I think when we talk about revolution, or war being the midwife of revolution, that's a big part of it.
Basically what you're saying is it's not necessarily just war leading to revolution, but this sort of oppression that the working class is feeling pushes them into a fight back. And you gave examples of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement, and I mean even in the labor movement. Is that what you're saying, Connor?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Obviously, we're not saying that you need a war to have a revolution, but these kinds of phenomena, these crises that are generated by this system that culminate in things like war are often, the kind of spark that can bring these movements about to actually overthrow the system.
Yeah,